Good morning, everyone.
Sure.
All you folks. I was wondering how many people have seen Karen Rinaldo's Mayflower 1621 painting? Is that how many people have seen? Okay. And I printed out, if you may, many of you have seen it, but I just want you to be aware that there's a print of it. I printed it on the fly. I didn't even ask her permission, but she was not mad at me for printing it. But what I like about it is I also brought the key for that print. So you can, if you have someone, a Mayflower ancestor that you're connected to or something, you might look at where she placed them. I mean, I don't know if Karen will end up saying something about it, but it's a first serious attempt at coming up with a realistic or true, what we historically might know is who was there. And in fact, when I look at it, I see there's really not that many women. And I think about how few people there were to organize that meal. And my wife is a descendant of some of those women. And I can't tell you, it's just astonishing to me. My wife openly says, I hate cooking. And I think it might be because of some historical, tradition of hating, that experience. Anyway, thought I'd share that with you. That's when I look at that picture, that's what I look at is how hard that must have been for the cooks. But so we do have Karen Rinaldo and Kevin Doyle here for a talk on their trip to the Netherlands. She'll tell us when that happened. But I want to give a chance for Linda, for Linda, just a short little statement on the cemetery project, which she's bit off a lot.
So we're in the first winter of this. We've done the work in 14 of the 17 cemeteries. We have 3 remaining. And so now there's the part of doing the research of which veterans are in which cemeteries. We're also having meetings with various people because I really want to say to you that we need researchers, we need people with any kind of gifts, masons, people that write grants. We may be trying to get the old burial ground designated a historic place. If you can believe it, according to DPW, it's not, and that would help matters. So I've met with the DPW, so we're in a series of meetings right now of just collecting information. CPC has done their job for this year. They'll then open it for next year, and it looks as though my read on this is that CPC will be funding the old burial ground for quite some time, and it needs it. So that's a good thing. But we're truly making this up as we go along. Anne has helped with the cemetery contacts, typing up a really good list. Ralph doesn't like this, but he's lead researcher on who are the veterans. And so we'll be meeting with people in the finance department of the town to find out what happens with the trust fund, with the perpetual care funds. There's a lot we don't know. So we're still in the uncovery or discovery of these things. So if you've got people that are talented and have time available, rope them in and then put them in touch with me and we'll figure out what part they can play. Because I felt we could even figure out what to do with music. So it's quite an exciting project. And the more we wrap in, the more excitement I want to get. One of my big things right now is to meet with the high school and see how we can get involved with the upper grades. So hope I've dangled enough in front of you to say we've got work to do.
Yeah, what we're saying is that come spring, there'll be a lot of field work to do in cemeteries. It's really very worthwhile work in some of the largest cemeteries. We've done some small ones now, but now we're taking on the big ones, and we'll need a lot of people to help with taking that inventory. Deb, you have a question? No, we have to get, that we have to get permission. I'd rather not talk about that subject, but we do have to get permission from the cemeteries, or even, yeah, it's complicated what you're allowed to clean. Yeah, so, and also Eleanor Baldick is here, and she's the first president of our society. This is coming up our 40th year, and I'm very glad to see you. Her daughter has brought her. So let's give it over now to Karen Rinaldo. She has a, here's a short thing. Here is, Karen is an artist and owner of Gallery on Main. I bet you many of you knew that, in Falmouth here. In the early 1990s, she was commissioned to create a historically accurate painting of the first Thanksgiving in 1621, I mentioned. And over the course of 7 months, she dedicated herself to this one piece, and the painting was part of the collection at Plymouth Plantation for over 20 years, along with works of Norman Rockwell and N.C. Wyeth. Where's the painting now?
It's at Pilgrim Hall.
Okay, all right. And is that considered its permanent home?
They've been talking about getting a 90-year lease to have the painting there in their collection. It's out of my hands because it's owned by the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the copyright on it, but hopefully they'll have some success.
And Kevin Doyle is an oral historian and former president of the Old Stone Dock. Anyone know what the Old Stone Dock is?
Anybody not know?
And the two of them have written in the wake of the Mayflower that they brought here. If you want to look at that, I've gotten my sign. You probably didn't even know, Karen, you signed it for me. Which includes illustrations by Karen. So Karen, and here's your, and Kevin, here's the advancer.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you to the Genealogical Society, to Tim Martin, Dottie Priestley, the board for this invitation. I'd like to just speak to the point of the invitation because it's very important to Kevin and myself. We go around the country and we talk about our trip. We talk about the process of creating the painting and the book. But it's very nice to be invited to other parts of the country and be able to talk about the town that we live in and work in. But it's very special when you do something in your own hometown and when you have an invitation. We very much appreciate that because that's really where your heart is. And during 2020, I had delivered several talks trying to raise some money for Museums on the Green. 2020 really closed so many businesses and opportunities for people to get into museums. And so as time progressed, I thought, how could we create some energy here and get people back into the museum? So we did raise a little bit of money. The painting was on display, a very special exhibit for about a year, but that was 2020 and nobody was really able to see it. So then we get invitations to travel, and we're going to talk about how we ended up going over to the Netherlands. What was the process, the driving force that got us there? And how did we even attempt that? We have to back up and give you a little information on how the painting was created. So I'm not taking over the mic. You will get your time at the mic, Kevin. But we just want to give you a little bit of information about.
I'm going to aim it this way.
Is that working? Advancer? It worked for you.
What do we need?
Maybe James. Golly, is that interesting?
Yeah, does it have to be
No.
on a site?
This is weird. When you think about this. Does not work.
Yeah, it just worked.
Well, I guess you're gonna be,
Do it manually?
it's frozen here. Well, let me stop a moment.
There we go.
Well,
Okay, there you are.
well, I need to see if, insert slideshow from current slide. That works. Now, does this work? Yes. Okay, that's working now.
Perfect.
But now I need to share the screen with the Zoom audience. Again. I'm gonna do it this way.
Manually do it too.
I think this will work now. Does it work now?
Yes,
Okay.
we're good.
Yeah.
Sorry about that inconvenience. So we're gonna talk just briefly about how I got to do the painting of the first Thanksgiving, then how we went to the Netherlands. So from about 1973, leading up to 1976, there was a series of bicentennial paintings. Massachusetts was the second piece, and this is a montage style where several elements, historic landmarks are added to a painting. We're gonna go through this a little quickly. Cape Cod Bicentennial, Falmouth, which many of you have seen, maybe some of you have. Of course, America the Beautiful had never been done before as a composition. The life of Catherine Lee Bates, our native daughter here. The Falmouth Museums on the Green has that in their collection. And so these pieces were what led up to the invitation and the commission to do the first Thanksgiving painting. The first Thanksgiving painting inspired the book In the Wake of the Mayflower. And then that further inspired our trip to the Netherlands through an invitation from a few people in Leiden to walk in the footsteps of the pilgrims. And there's nothing more exciting or inspiring than being in the place where it happened. And our first stop, and with the guidance of our tour guide, a person who I met through the print of the first Thanksgiving, had received an email back early in 2020, and she said, love to have a copy of the print. We're doing an exhibit here in Leiden. And one thing led to another, and a relationship developed, and then an invitation to continue to come over and see what would have been done had we had the opportunity in 2020.
A couple of folks here have been there.
Yeah, how many of you have been to the Netherlands, to Holland, Amsterdam? Yeah, it's an interesting city, and if you've had the chance to be in Leiden, then you see the distinctive difference between Amsterdam and Leiden, just as the Pilgrims did. And it's at this slide, and we're not going to go through each point, but I'll have Kevin talk a little bit about whichever point you'd like.
The point I'll make is that Karen will click the slide ahead in 5 seconds anyway. You can get easily hung up on the history of the Pilgrims and why they left. Suffice it for this conversation to say they did. King Henry VIII had made all of England subject to the Church of England faith. And the separatists said, no deal. If it's not in the Bible, it doesn't belong in the liturgy. And they became separatists. They were harassed in England, so they had to leave. They ended up in Holland. And we gave our wave when we got there. This wave has been practiced all over the country when we travel, as Karen said. People see it, they know it. Say, hey, can we take a picture of you doing the wave too? So there we were.
And this is interesting because this is a recreated village in Zaandam. It's in North Holland. And it's just a very intriguing place, very inspiring place, and goes through kind of the history of what they do there. The windmills, of course, are a fascination. And one of the things that I found very interesting was how the windmills can really be communication for people. They can send messages just by the angle and the positioning of their sails. And aside from that, they serve the purpose of being grinding for corn and different products. So quite versatile. Half Gardens, any of you been? Yeah, it's a beautiful place. We're going to provide in a few photographs everything but the perfume that you smell as you walk the gardens. And truly a palette of different flowers and just a beautiful place. And this originally was a hunting grounds back in the 1500s. Amsterdam, for those of you who have been there, you see that it's a very crowded, very commercial, very robust city, very diverse, very inclusive. Those are all the characteristics that the Pilgrims were looking to find and what they felt would be very attractive for their families.
This harbor scene that Karen portrayed in 1600 looks remarkably like it does today. It's a jam-packed little harbor right there around Amsterdam. Those of you who've been there recognize exactly what we're talking about. That building in the background was not there at the time. That's a train station today. So that wasn't there in the 1600s. Much of the rest of Amsterdam was there. So as you look down the street and so forth, and you see the cathedral in the background, that was there. The canals were all there. This is a Christopher Wren steeple right there, and all the buildings along the side of the waterway were there. There's another picture of the Christopher Wren steeple.
And it's interesting, Amsterdam is often referred to as the Venice of the North, just because it has so many canals. People actually, you'll see them fishing in the canals. And there's like 10 different varieties of fish that they actually find there. But it's an interesting, diverse area again.
I keep that slide in there just because of all the buildings, there's this Irish pub stuck right in the middle of it. Couldn't resist. That's where the buildings are. You've seen them. Very narrow because they were taxed on the frontage of the building and also taxed by glass. So the big windows were a sign of wealth, and people showed them off proudly. Again, the Christopher Wren Tower. This was we went on several canal cruises. It's either that or swim, I guess. And you see all the different tops. That was all that's their equivalent of the period pieces. There's a name for all those various tops that you see on the houses. And there we are again. The wave is everywhere.
So the Netherlands has a very distinguished career as a maritime center, seafaring nation. They were, still are. And this is the Amsterdam, a recreated version of the Amsterdam boat that you see in behind us. And the National Maritime Museum dates back to 1656. But it was wrecked in its very first voyage off of Asia during a storm off the coast of, I think it was in England, actually. But we had an opportunity to visit the museum, which had a lot of artifacts and valuable collection of maps and charts. And the next slide, if you go to the next slide,
I was going
has,
to do that, but there's my wife.
yeah,
She was there.
yeah. And the person that's by the mast there was our tour guide. And she was internationally known as a tulip aficionado. I mean, she was a tulip scientist. And our invitation came down to be with them during Tulip DNA Day. Actually, it was DNA Day in Leiden. And it's something you have to respect the process that they adjust the soil, they adjust the light slightly, and you have a totally different tulip presentation. This is a very ornate royal barge that would be used for dignitaries, special occasions, very ornate, very highly decorated with details and gold gilding to it. A very beautiful piece.
Once again, this is 200 years after the Pilgrims were there, but it speaks to the maritime life of the Dutch. Now, I'm going to talk about this because I'm going to show you a side of Karen Rinaldo, you know. This is their museum in Delft Haven. Some of you may have been there. It's got the very famous painting of Rembrandt's
Vermeer.
Vermeer painting of the girl with the pearl.
Yeah, and we were too late. We weren't able to get in to see it, unfortunately. They were just closing.
So Karen is a forger. One of these is the original Vermeer, and the other one is Karen's forger. Amazing, isn't it? There she is, proudly pointing to the piece that she has copied.
Yeah, and this Delftware factory in Delft, it's very typical what the Pilgrims would have seen, the pottery at that time also.
Is the night watch, of course, done in Delft pottery.
And again, a case of timing, we weren't able to get in to see the night watch. But this is The Hague, and it's the administrative capital. It's where all the government procedures take place. Very elaborate building. And Leiden, which is what, about 2 hours by train from Amsterdam to Leiden?
Yeah, probably. It's
Yeah.
about 40 miles south. And now we're going to talk about Leiden. We just kind of wanted to get you oriented towards.
Well, there's a distinctive difference between Leiden and Amsterdam. Leiden is, as Bradford said 400 years ago, it's the most beautiful, fair and beautiful city. And it has a much quieter tempo. It doesn't have that intense hustle and bustle, but it's still very welcoming. And that was key and very important to the Pilgrims. The symbol that you see throughout and on buildings and in the different designs on the roads are the keys. The keys were central to their motto, for the sake of freedom. And our first impression, Kevin will admit, we said, if we don't get killed by a bicycle, we'll be lucky.
It's hard to do about bicycle. People all over town, and some of them, most of them are powered. It's catching on over here. I think if you watch the bike path, you get it.
Yeah, here, I'll do this. Another microphone.
Oh, nice.
Oh.
So thank you. If you walk the bike path, you're very much familiar with the concept of the bicycles with power. And they cruise around town like they're in a Corvette, you know, they top down. You step off a curb in the wrong place and you're doomed. But aren't these canals beautiful? So different from what we were just looking at in Amsterdam. Of course, part of it helps it's Karen's picture. This was the original gate to Leiden. This goes way back. This goes back to the Romans. When they would take you out to the town gate and say, okay, you're expelled from the town, that's where they would take you.
Yeah, the Way House, it was important to the city. It was a way of taking in monies from things that were received in products. So it was a type of a tax then that they would place on items. And what we're leading up to now is showing what the pilgrims were encountering and what becomes the reason why they want to leave Leiden. Now, it's interesting because Rembrandt leaves Leiden to pursue a better way of life in Amsterdam with his art. And he came from a very well-to-do family and they were able to have him be well-educated. So he leaves Leiden, he goes to Amsterdam. The pilgrims leave Amsterdam to go to Leiden. But now they realize that they're faced with extreme conditions, the hardship of long hours of working every day. Their children are involved in the process of work. Their children begin to lose their identity and their inner compass, and this becomes of great concern to the families. We have a couple of other slides here of the bridge. You want to talk about Corn Bridge?
I do, yeah, because there were no supermarkets. There are no supermarkets over there right now. But they used to do commerce at bridges. And this particular bridge was the Corn Bridge. And if it rained, it didn't have the cupola over it at the time. If it rained, they would take the corn under the bridge and use that for shelter. But when you think about the Pilgrim story, you think about the place called Corn Hill as you drive down Cape. And Corn Hill was probably named Corn Hill because they called everything after the bridges. Corn Bridge. This is where you would buy your corn. There was the fabric bridge, there was the flour bridge, there was all kinds of bridges that would sell you whatever you wanted, and you'd go up and down the canals to buy your goods. Another view of the Corn Bridge.
Yeah, the covering there was a newer adaptation of the bridge.
These houses would have been there.
These are all 900-year-old structures.
I should point out the number of bicycles.
Yeah. So the Peterskirk Church is known as the Pilgrim's Church. That's what the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches that I mentioned earlier. They are the owners of the painting, the First Thanksgiving 1621. But the churches today are not used for mass services. They're used for anniversaries, public events. It's a meeting place for special occasions. And there were two plaques that were made. One for this was for Reverend John Robinson, who was a spiritual advisor to the Pilgrims. So there were two commissions actually over the course of time. And one was this plaque, and the second one became the painting.
Right. This was 1891, and 1994 was the date when the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, which managed to fit on this whole plaque. The first 100 years later, they wanted to recognize Reverend John Robinson, who was the spiritual advisor to the Pilgrims, and who basically ran the Church of the Separatists there in England before they left. So this is the way they remembered him 200 years ago. And here's the interior of the church, and you look at these and you say, wow, that was built like in 1200.
The buildings are just, they're fascinating, they're beautiful, they're amazing. It's just, you lose the words to properly describe them. Just stunning architecture.
And there's the plaque to John Robinson on the inside of the church. And that was where we have a mock-up, I think, of how they intended to show Karen's work 100 years later.
Actually, that's the next church coming up.
Okay.
Yeah.
This
This
is
is interesting. That's an interesting slide. You know, we talk about the housing shortage today. And at the end of the presentation, I always talk about the comparisons between 400 years ago and today. So this building was the home of Reverend Robinson. And in the rear of the property was enough space to build a couple dozen houses, couple dozen structures for people who were in need of housing. So similarity, we have housing problems today.
These were later additions back in here, but this was all open space to Reverend Robinson. And so when the Pilgrims left from England and arrived finally came down, they spent about 3 years up in the Amsterdam area before coming down to Leiden. And when they came down to Leiden, they had no place to go, so Reverend Robinson kept them in this courtyard, which would have been a little bit bigger at the time.
And Rembrandt had his studio. This was
Right
just
there.
about diagonal to the Peterskirk Church, where he was also a choir boy.
And this is the fort, where we talk about the time of the Romans. The Romans actually built this mound right here because there were no mounds in or around home. So they imported the dirt to put the fort on top. So it dates back to the 9th century.
It's like the highest point in Leiden, I think, from the top of that hill.
Now Rembrandt was born in 1606. So they're probably there in 1610, 1614, they didn't leave until 1619. And so I like to think of Rembrandt playing with the kids from the Mayflower and probably running around that fort at the top of the hill. There it is, I can see him, you know, we used to play games, I'm sure you played the same types of games. You run this way and I'll run that way, we'll see who gets back first. I relate to see the Pilgrim Boys challenging Rembrandt.
It's like a 360-degree view of the city from the top of the hill there. That is the church where we had been invited to give our presentation. Actually, it's a 900-year-old church right in the heart of Leiden and across the street from the Pilgrim Museum.
Yeah, and this is the fort, right? The fort is just here on the right-hand side, and there's the runway around it. Then going to the church. Just a spectacular place.
So this is the interior, and that's another photo of our tour guide. As I said, the interiors now are used as exhibition halls for special occasions. And the next slide actually shows the vastness of the space between the pillars, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm just gonna show Leonie right here.
Yep.
Who is the PhD, she's the state expert on tulips that Karen talked about before.
So this is our mock-up of what their intention was, to take a copy of the painting and stretch it from one pillar to the next. They had a couple of altars or stages, they use them now, and a setup of how the chairs would be. They're very well thought out, very elaborate, and quite a nice invitation. This is the American Pilgrim Museum. It was directed at the time by Dr. Jeremy Bangs, who was a scholar and a prolific writer. And he actually has a note that we were lucky enough to get just before his death. It's included in the book, In the Wake of the Mayflower. And he talks about the attempt at the painting and how it has been brought to his attention many times in social media. And he was at Plymouth Plantation, it was then called Plymouth Plantation, so he was aware of it.
One of the things that a lot of people don't realize about the Pilgrims was that they were used to find things. This is the type of pottery and the type of silverware that they would have had, or I should say metalware. And so when they set up a Plymouth Plantation, when you look at it, it was very unusual to the Indians, the natives, the Wampanoags who were in the area, but it was also very unfamiliar to the Pilgrims. They were used to living in those brick houses that we just saw. Westminster Abbey at this point was 400 years old. They knew how to build fancy buildings, but that's not what they had in Plymouth. This is William Brewster alleyway right here. That's where he had his print shop set up right through this alleyway down here. So as we walked down there, Karen and I both had our hands all over the walls, saying, maybe once he touched there.
Well, you know, it's amazing. You say you're walking in the footsteps of history. This is just going back 400 years. It's hard to wrap your head around that, but it was very valuable for us because it was continuing to do the research that we started in 2019 with the book.
That's about how narrow everything is. When they talk about alleyways, boy, they mean it. When you think about New Orleans, and you think about some of the alleys that they have, this is where it all would have come from.
These boats are interesting, and you see the boards on the side, they're called lee boards. Those sailors here, you recognize what they do and what their meaning is, purpose for the boats. But the boats, actually, people live on them. They're also working boats. But purchasing property, it's the same around the world. It's prohibitive. And so even these boats have become very expensive craft to be living on. Very surprising, but in the range of what we pay here. And this is a sample of, it's actually the centerpiece of the 400th painting that I did for the town of Eastham. And it's the shallop, which becomes their signature boat because the Pilgrims came ashore on Eastham's first encounter beach.
Just as the lee boards were used for navigation in shallow waters, so too, they built the lee boards onto the shallop, which is about a 30-foot rowboat, sailboat. You could propel it either way.
It acted as a stabilizer, yeah, and directed the boat different positions.
This you may recognize as Rembrandt's Bridge, but you'll recognize it better from this angle. And you've seen the picture of Rembrandt, the painting that Rembrandt did of the bridge, because his father was a miller right here. That's where his father would work. So Rembrandt would cross that bridge all the time. And you've probably seen a bridge similar up in Maine. Where's the place? Huh? Yeah, it is. It is in New York. Going across I can think of the place that this was anyway. They got the same type of a bridge.
This is Rembrandt's neighborhood, actually. His house is just across from this water canal.
Right up there.
Yeah.
Look at the beautiful garden. You know, again, this is so different from what you'd find in Amsterdam. Nobody looked like this. And then just
A close-up of the night watch. So a lot of Rembrandt's paintings had, and he used the symbolism of the windmill as a symbol of strength. And that's what he felt that it would mean in a composition. Rembrandt, this is, many of you know about the theft at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. This was the Storm of the Sea.
You might wonder where Karen got that picture.
So often what happens, you know, they'll take a house down and then they'll build another structure and they'll put a plaque up, recognizing what it was, what it originally was. This was the home of Rembrandt. So this is a rebuilt house. And that's his statue right across the street from the canal.
I wanted to get a picture of Karen standing right up there, right next to him. And I did.
So was it like 1572 when Leiden is under siege from the Spanish?
Spanish, right?
And yeah, and they have two encounters, and the sea beggars decide they're going to flood the outskirts of the city to save the city from the Spanish invasion, and they successfully do. The people in Leiden, many of them lost their lives from starvation. The Spanish were trying to starve the city and hold back on different products that they would need. And what was it, William of Orange? He had declared to the people, if you stand strong, there'll be some reward in the end. And they did. They held on, and they stayed with what they had to go through. And in return, as a gift, and this goes now to 1574, perhaps, so a little bit further, a little bit later. Yeah, he offers them Leiden University. Leiden University.
A lifetime of free taxes,
Yeah,
or I'll give you a university. And to show you, you know, what the people thought at the time, they said, give us the university. So they got it.
so every year, in October 3rd, the town celebrates with it's called the Relief of Leiden. And that's the herring and whitefish. And that may have been almost the beginning of a Thanksgiving celebration. It could have been.
Could have been. If that were to happen, they still celebrate it at that gate that I showed you earlier on.
October 3rd, yep.
This is where the Romans would have staked their claim. If they banished you from Leiden, they would have taken you to that bridge. This, once again, is the professor of all things tulip. And this is an expatriate who became Jeremy Banks's understudy. And so he was also one of the guides around Leiden, and one of the people who described the pilgrim experience to us.
And actually, they're two perfect individuals for Leiden, because Leiden becomes the city of discoveries, and they're all about discoveries. They're all about science and engineering.
That kind of advances anymore, so if you want to just tap it through.
This is the oldest botanical garden in the Netherlands, the Hortus Botanicus. And this is where one of the pilgrims did his research and becomes the doctor to the pilgrims. Actually studies their herbs and different plants.
If you could go back to that.
Here it is.
Oh,
It seems to be working right now.
thank you. Then we'll test it out. Is it working? Not happening, Tim.
Okay, just get closer here, maybe. Want to go?
Advance,
okay,
right there.
Hold
Yeah,
that one
right
right there.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's possible that you might, maybe it's distance to this right now that the battery is low. Try it.
What we're doing right there is the doctor is showing us what looks to be a series of beds of red tulips. In reality, what it is what Karen described earlier. It's different soils with different waterings. And she is studying the impact of what soil and what combination is the best way to grow tulips. Tulips were a gift to the Dutch, first imported from Turkey. So it starts as a Turkish flower. That's myself and my wife. So here's Leiden Observatory. As they have one of the oldest universities, so too they have the oldest observatory in the world.
This is just showing the canalways and some of these houseboats where people live. Pretty impressive.
This is, they call it the Vliet. If you look at down at this portion right here, you see the names of all the, you can probably find one of your relatives engraved right there.
And the statue is a symbol of the uncertainty, the steps that the pilgrims would be taking. So it's just an uncertainty to what is ahead for them.
If you look at this side of the statue, you see how smooth it is. And then from the other side, you'll see that it's quite well weathered. And that's the promise of what is to come is still to be known. This is kind of what you're leaving from as you leave from this spot to go down to Delta.
Actually, the next slide is your departure spot.
So there we are standing on the canal. And this place right here, just behind Karen, you'll see is that fellow that I was talking about. His name is, what's his name?
Tamara Jones.
Tamara Jones. And so he said, the pilgrims left right from where my feet are. He said, this is where they left from. And so I kind of pointed right across the canal at another platform, very similar, and I said, why do you think they weren't over at that one? And he said, because they lived behind this building right here. So.
And that's Leiden University in the background. There's a flag coming off of the cupola there. So now we have a sketch again from In the Wake of the Mayflower, and this is a picture of the speedwell leaving Delfshaven. Another photograph to follow will show Delfshaven Center. But we're closer now to talking about this group of people now getting ready to leave all of their belongings, their families, their homes, their way of life, and making out on a new venture. They're leaving behind a way of life. They're leaving behind a very important person to them, their spiritual advisor, Robinson. And a couple of things of interest, though, of Robinson, I think.
Well, I'll read this
Yeah.
from the pedestal of the William Bradford statue in
Plymouth.
So they left the goodly and pleasant city, which is Leiden, which had been their resting place for almost 12 years, but they knew they were pilgrims. That's the books written about that sentence. They knew they were pilgrims, and they looked not so much upon those things in the past, but lift up their eyes to the heavens, their dearest country, and quieted their spirits.
And this is the center of Delfshaven. And this would have been the point of departure. We don't have a picture of the canal area there, but that sketch was kind of denoting that. So, as I mentioned, Reverend Robinson gets left behind. He is their spiritual advisor. He is really their core. He's their center point. And this image out of In the Wake of the Mayflower, my feeling is it's the most desperate image. And you really have to wrap your head around what these people are doing. And some have said, were they really thinking clearly? Because they're taking on an enormous venture. They're risking the lives of themselves, the children that are going with them, And all because they are in a desperate mode. And that desperateness is what really is driving them. And talk a little bit about that journey going over, what their intended route was.
Yeah, and so you can see where they left from Holland. And you can see where they left from Holland. And so England was on their way. And that's when they realized the speedwell was not going to do well. And so there was time to everybody jump aboard the Mayflower. The Mayflower was a much larger vessel. Some people decided they weren't up to the challenge of the trip. It was going to be 2 months of sailing. And so they got off, so they had to replenish it. We have one chapter in the book is called Pilgrims, Puritans, and Profiteers. Because once they get over here, there's a tremendous conflation of the Pilgrims and the Puritans. The Puritans, similar sect, similar motivation, but the Pilgrims were settled Plymouth, and they knew they were Pilgrims. In fact, the first English child born in America is called Peregrine. Peregrine means traveler, pilgrim. And so they knew they were pilgrims. They knew what they were doing. They were leaving from England and getting far away to proselytize their religion in the new world. So when they were sailing across, they ditched the speedwell way back. They had to go back. And so they're making the journey across the Atlantic in September, which is no time to be sailing in the North Atlantic. They came across and they hit right about in the middle of the arm of the Cape, right around East Ham, Nauset type of place. And the captain said, "Hey, why don't we try to see if we can make it to New Amsterdam, which was the old New York City." They weren't aiming for Jamestown at all. They were looking to go where there was a Dutch settlement, which was in New York. Subsequently, in 1664, the English and the Dutch fought about New York, about that port at the base of the Hudson River, and the English won, and that's when it became New York instead of New Amsterdam. But so then they hit right about Nauset, and they start to sail south, and then realize you don't round Monomoy. You know, you kind of respect Monomoy, and so they turned around and went back because they did know, because Gosnold, and you've all seen the Gosnold statue plaque there in Woods Hole, 1602. He had given them a very good map to go by. So that's when they went back up and spent 2 months, it wasn't 2 months, yeah, it was. About 6 weeks they spent in Portsmouth while they were looking at Provincetown, while they were looking around, and that's when they had the first encounter on December 8th and so forth, before going over to Plymouth in December.
One of the things you have to be wondering, what are they thinking? One of the things I think that's critical, what they're thinking, is based on a letter that gets handed to them by Reverend Robinson when they're leaving England or Delfshaven. And I think that goes to what inspired the compact. And I say that because when they arrive in Provincetown, they realize that they have to have some order in place or they'll have a mutiny. People will be jumping ship. And so I think as they're on this journey, they're considering his words, which were very inspirational and go to the heart of the Mayflower Compact. This is a little watercolor image from the book In the Wake of the Mayflower.
Well, you got magic in the fingers.
And so here we show the commission of the 1621 painting. You know, it was, to say it was an honor is an understatement. It was an overwhelming project. It was a huge responsibility. I was very fortunate to be put in the hands of the eminent scholar of all things Native related at then Plymouth Plantation. And this was a gentleman who's a Mashpee resident. He went by the tribal name of Nanny Pashamit, and he went step by step with me in the disposition, the composition, the way the natives would have been portrayed, what they would have been wearing, and why they were there. One of the talks that we give is about the process involved in the painting, and it's a step-by-step, stroke by stroke of what went into the work. Some of you may have seen a little video that we had quickly at the Museums on the Green, but it is another talk, and it's an interesting one. The process of writing and the collaboration that Kevin and I did with the book.
There's so many things going on
Yeah.
in that painting that you might not realize. But if you look at that empty chair right there, over half the pilgrims died during the first 4 months they were there. And so this represents, there were 53 survivors and everyone was accounted for.
And I say that it also recognizes the loss on the native side, who had, during the plague, had lost thousands. It almost annihilated their population. So the chair is that symbolism that goes to the heart of the loss on both sides.
As you look at the head table, you'll see Bradford at the head, because Carver would have already died. There's Edward Winslow. Now here's John Holland, and there's Miles Standish. And when you think about the fact where John Alden, excuse me, I said the wrong drawing. That was John Alden and sitting next to Miles Standish, because when you think about the courtship of Miles Standish had asked John Alden to go and speak to Priscilla Mullins, who's right there, about marrying him. You know, how interested are you, Priscilla, in
Speak for yourself.
speak for yourself,
John.
John? And so John does. So to show that relationship, Karen has portrayed them sitting side by side. That's part of her humor. Here's Massasoit, and he's sitting next to Squanto, who we all know. Squanto, however, thought that he was one who was speaking English. So why should Massasoit get all the credit?
Yeah, there was a little rivalry, you could say, going on there, and that's why I have Squanto looking away.
Squanto's looking this way, Massasoit is looking that way. Again, you know, there's so much going on in this painting. You see the fenced-in animals, and that's totally foreign to the natives.
Yeah.
They would never fence in an animal. They had no fences at all. If you look back and you see the cultivated fields, you know, they would grow their crops and so forth, but it wasn't cultivated like they were cultivating.
Yeah, it tells a story on so many levels, Kevin,
Yeah.
you know, and one of the things of myth that was introduced and accepted by the historians, and I'll explain why, the rock is a thing of myth. But they said they would include that because it goes to the heart of the pilgrims' tenacity and determination and vigilance. And so the rock was included.
I wanted to point out the Billington boy.
Yeah.
There's one kid right there. John Billington was a bad guy. He was a youngster, but his father happened to be hung. So that tells you something too, I
And a
suppose.
little troublemaker.
So to portray him as a troublemaker, Karen has him hiding behind that building right there. Another interesting thing is this segment right here was asked by Philadelphia Cream Cheese if they could use some of her painting of these women proceeding down with the two pies. And it was one full page of USA Today a year ago Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Said, no wonder they were happy. They were having Philadelphia cream cheese pies.
You know, the painting literally took on a life of its own from the moment it was released from my hands. Fortunately, a board member had suggested you hold on to the copyright, because if you get contacts from people, you can vet them and give them permission. And another important element, having heard from Scholastic Book, and they included the first Thanksgiving in their Teaching American History with Art Masterpieces.
Some of you may recall that Mark Schmidt, when he was at the Historical Society here, was the first one to call for Karen's first Thanksgiving to leave from the boardroom of the National Congregation of Christian Churches. And it was when he saw this and saw Karen right in there with Trail of Tears and Washington crossing the Delaware, the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, he looked and said, wow, something must be going on in that painting.
Well, you know, it's an amazing story. There's no formula that you can put together to say, well, if I do all of these things, it will become a success. But in its own way, it conveys a story. It has a great sensitivity, which is what the Wampanoags have appreciated, and really reveals a time that, you know, it's so many similarities to today, so many things that we are conscious of and aware of and important to us were important to the natives and the Pilgrims then. This was the Smithsonian Magazine did an article portraying the historical accuracy, the proportion of the 2-to-1, the 90 Wampanoags and the 52 English colonists. So it has been an honor to work with Kevin, collaboration with the book. That's another whole process. Those of you who are writers know you take that blank white piece of paper, and until you get the first word on the page, it's a pretty scary thing. Just like the white canvas, until you get that first stroke on the canvas, it's a very scary place to be. But, and it's been an honor to be here, talk with you, spend the morning here with you, and thank you all for coming out on a cold December morning. We wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Thank you for having us.
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I can give you a microphone.
Just interested in some of the steps that you took to ensure that the painting had historical accuracy.
I didn't hear the first part of that.
I'm just, well, wonder if you could describe some of the steps that were required that you
Yeah.
took to determine historical
So
accuracy, like
the fact, yeah, that I was working with this historian was critical, because without his input and without his information, it would have been a lovely piece. But it was the integrity that was needed, and that was the information that he was able to incorporate. And so then I am left to create a village and a background and a story, and create a very accurate portrayal of it, like that Kodak moment where you're stepping back and it's this moment in time. What happened hours later or days later, the fact that there were no women on the native side that were present, although they were in my drawing, but they weren't approved to go into the painting, and there was a reason for that. They were there to protect their sachem. They were there to protect Massasoit. They may have not even intended to stay for 3 days, but when they realized that things were calm and there was no hostility, that was why the women weren't there on the first day of the 3-day feast. So every box had to be checked.
And one of the things we're most proud of is that in this text, Chief Flying Eagle of the Wampanoag tribe has said, finally, somebody's looking at this period of time with a positive eye. Some of you I told I was retired to become a gadfly. And I was just going to be writing articles to the newspaper all the time about what's wrong with Falmouth or any place else. And I've written several things. I've spoken at town meeting about the flag, about the state flag, and how much we valued our relationship with the tribe since 1620, and again in 1775, as we approach the 250th anniversary now of the American Revolution. There were 67 Mashpee Indians who volunteered to fight with the colonists. 15 of them were killed. And when you think about it, they taught us how to fight. From the very first encounter, when they greeted the pilgrims who were sleeping up on top of the hill there in Eastham, and at daybreak, whoo, and suddenly this war cry goes up, and they come running out of their tents to be greeted by 30 Wampanoags. We did the same thing from behind each fence and farmyard wall. That's, right out of the Longfellow's poem.
Yeah.
Who taught us how to fight from behind each fence and farmyard wall while the British Army is marching down the middle of the street? We learned that from the tribe. So in 1777, when Paul Revere and John Hancock get together and say, hey, we need to create a state flag in 1777, who do they feature? They feature a Wampanoag emblazoned in gold thread. And that's the derivation of the state flag.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of controversy and conversation and continued conversation to have on that subject, I think. But thank you for that, Kevin.
Any other questions? David?
You said that, David, there you go. Said that Roberts stated.
Robinson.
Robinson.
Yeah.
He was their spiritual leader.
Mm.
Who became the spiritual leader? after
And
that?
so he's present, he's standing, he's next to Bradford in the painting, and that was Winslow.
Oh, you got to.
He became the substitute, if you could say substitute. It wasn't a substitute, but he took on the role of, yeah. And he's the only one we have a portrait of.
Now, who's the only Catholic in that painting?
Who's the only Catholic?
I don't know.
Well,
Who is?
Do you know?
Squanto.
Squanto was the only Catholic. Oh, interesting.
Praying Indy.
Yeah. There's a new book out on Squanto. I bet that's in the new book. Did you get it?
No,
Oh,
I can't read anymore, so.
That's it.
Squanto was kidnapped.
yeah,
That's right, yeah.
great.
He had been kidnapped in 1616.
Yeah.
I have trouble saying that.
I think perhaps he was baptized over there.
Yeah, yeah,
He was baptized in Spain.
In Spain.
Spain.
very interesting.
Mm.
So there.
Anything else? Anyone?
This is really just a comment, but it seems to me the value of your painting must have gone way up.
I think so.
Years.
Yeah, no, there are some things that you say priceless. It's a story that is the cornerstone of our history, and a lot of things will change over time and we discover new things, but the heart of what happened and the truth of what is revealed in that one image. It just tells so many stories on so many levels. And really, for the differences, there are boundless similarities between those two cultures. And I think if we realize that in today's culture, I think we'd have a much more civil society too, that we are more the same than we are different.
Linda.
Are there prints available of this?
There are, and I have some at the gallery, and if you're in Plymouth, you can get them at Plymouth Patuxent, Pilgrim Hall Museum, and a number of other places as well, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Let me just say it's